Alrighty, so for those of you that may not be as familiar with MountainTrue, I don't know who's on the line here, so I just threw in a couple of slides here at the beginning. MountainTrue's mission is to champion resilient forests, clean water, green energy, and healthy communities throughout our mountain region, which includes all of western North Carolina and the Hiwassee River watershed in North Georgia. We focus on a core set of issues that have high impact on the environmental health and long-term prosperity of the region. That includes advocating for sensible land use, restoring public forests, improving water quality, promoting clean energy, and encouraging civic engagement. So today we're talking about what I consider to be the strongest tool for environmental protection in the toolbox. We have a whole suite of bedrock environmental laws at the federal level that include the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, acts around Superfund, really bad industrial sites, polluted industrial sites, waste recovery, that govern things like landfills and whatnot. We have all these awesome pieces of legislation, but many of them, including the Clean Water Act, are really designed to clean up pollution after they happen, or to regulate pollution kind of at the source, just a permitting process to make sure that we can monitor and regulate particular facilities. But the National Environmental Policy Act, which is what we're going to talk about today, really prevents a lot of bad, what environmentalists would consider bad projects on the front end. And then mainly though, it's not as much about preventing bad projects as it is making projects better. And this is largely what we see on our public lands, is that NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, allows us to make projects better. So here's all the awesome main tenets of NEPA. So first of all, it requires, and this law applies anytime federal dollars are going to be spent. If there are any federal dollars in a project, I don't care who is actually hosting the project. It doesn't have to be a federal agency. If there are federal dollars going on, some level of NEPA has to be adhered to. And so the main tenets are to identify a purpose and need for the project. Honestly, just having that agency or whoever's going to do this federally grant funded project, spending our tax dollars, they have to identify that there is a need, and they have to prove that there's a need. And in some cases, we've actually been able to get rid of bad projects simply because they could not show that there was enough of a need to justify environmental impacts to actually do the thing. So after that, after they've identified a purpose and need, they have to consider project impacts on the natural environment, social and economic impacts. They have to develop and evaluate reasonable alternatives based on the purpose and need. They have to collaborate with federal, state, and local partners and tribal governments. They have to mitigate adverse impacts. If the impact can't be avoided, they have to repair the affected environment post-project or provide substitute environment, which is like, you know, if you're going to have to just pipe a stream completely, then you have to go and find another stream in the same basin and restore it to make up for it. That's what mitigation means. And then the last one, last but not least, as the old saying goes, is provide opportunities for public involvement. So public involvement is required throughout this entire process. And, you know, it's just that piece is critical to being able, for us to be able to, and others to be able to know that these projects are going on to begin with, and then help guide whatever agency is going through this NEPA process to make the project to have the least impact on the environment and the best outcomes socially and economically in the project region. So this is NEPA, and I just went through those basic tenets, and I'll just give you another second to be able to read some of the things that are in parentheses here, but I'm going to move on from this slide into a couple of case studies that have happened recently in the Western region. I'm the Western Regional Director for MountainTrue. I could have spent the entire 30 minutes just listing all the projects that have happened over MountainTrue's history in Western North Carolina, Alliance's history in Western North Carolina. There are so many projects that NEPA has helped us either stop or make better for the environment, water quality, our forests, and so forth. But I've picked out two that are pretty recent, like I said, and that I have significant involvement in, and so I know enough about to be talking to you about them today. The first one is in the Fires Creek Watershed. So Fires Creek is in Clay County, North Carolina. This is a map that shows, this is actually the Mountain Treasure Area map from the Wilderness Society. But this black line around this outer edge is roughly outlining the Fires Creek Watershed. It's actually a smaller line that's within here. But the light green, all of this area is U.S. Forest Service land. It's Nantahala National Forest. So Hayesville, North Carolina is right down here, just for some, you know, topography on the ground. And Murphy, North Carolina is over here to the west of this area. So Fires Creek, this dark area is inventory roadless area. We have recommended, and others have recommended, a large section of this in the current dry forest management plan for wilderness to be placed in wilderness management. And this is a huge recreation area. People fish, they horseback ride, hike, this rim trail, which I shouldn't be advertising all this because this is my backyard and nobody's in it right now. But it's a great 2 to 3 day backpacking trail around the rim. Hunting, it's a bear sanctuary, but people can hunt grouse and do hunt grouse, deer, other things in this area. So it's just it's an incredible public resource for both the forests and the recreation value. And so now I want you to look at this little white box right here. See this little white box? That's what's called an in-holding. So basically what happened is when the Nantahala National Forest, when they went out to gather up lands for the Nantahala National Forest, this little piece right here, along with a couple others you can see here, and they're scattered all throughout the forest, never got purchased. That box, which is actually 50 acres, remained in private ownership. Some of these things are just inexplicable. And furthermore, this white box that was owned by a private person or entity or whatever had no road access. So the only way to access this property was via horseback or on foot, basically, because it's only trails that go to it. So there's no road that connects. Okay, so that's a little bit of background about Fires Creek, and I'm going to give you just a little more in a minute. Now, the white box has now become pink on this map. And just a little bit of history. So in 2006-ish time frame, this piece of private property that had been owned by an entity since before the Forest Service was created was purchased by a group of landowners, several couples and a company, purchased this 50-acre in-holding in, I can't remember, it was either 2006 or 2007. In 2008, the Forest Service put out a scoping notice to request public comment under NEPA. This is why it was required. NEPA is the reason why it was required, that they put out a request for public comment on a proposed action to allow these landowners to build a road to the 50-acre in-holding. And the road was going to be for the purpose of constructing 4 primitive cabins on this 50 acres. So the purpose and need for the road was so that these private property owners could access their property by vehicle and build 4 primitive cabins and have them there. Okay. So April 2008 is when that started. So the proposed route when the environmental assessment came out in 2011 was to go up. So this is an open road here, this brown line. And then there's an open road that goes up Rockhouse Creek to a point about right here where it's gated. Okay, so today you can drive up the main road, 340, and then you can take whichever 340A or whatever this is, up to Rockhouse, and there's a gate right here, and there's a great trail, Rockhouse Creek Trail, goes up to Big Stamp, and then this, what is shown here as this brown road, as Phillips Ridge Road, is actually a trail, and it's a horse trail and hiking trail. And then, so they were gonna, the private landowners were gonna rehab this old logging road, 14 miles of it, and then they were gonna build a new piece out here to access their in-holing. So this was the proposed alternative, and there was only one alternative proposed in the original EA in 2011. So a little bit more about Fires Creek. So there are 10 outstanding resource waters that are classified by the state of North Carolina in Western North Carolina, and here they all are. Fires Creek is one of them. You see here, number 1, Fires Creek in the Hiwassee. Okay, so this is the best of the best water quality where this proposed road was supposed to go. And the Forest Service really had an obligation to prevent degradation of water quality in this watershed, just simply because of this outstanding resource waters classification. Also in the watershed, the underlying geology is acid producing rock formations. So when you disturb an acid producing rock formation, acid runoff is produced. And this happens a lot. You've heard about it from mines, and it's because this rock is being exposed to air and water. And this is actually on the Ocoee River in Tennessee. I took a picture of this rock, but this is an example of the acid rock formations. And so that existed in this area where they're going to be rehabbing this old logging road and building this new road. Okay, so all of that to say that you know, there was the potential for a large amount of environmental impact associated with this project, whose purpose and need was to rehab a road to this private inholding so that the landowners could build homes. And so NEPA requires that those environmental impacts on this public land, okay, had to be weighed against the purpose and need, and if they were allowed to do it, which the Forest Service ultimately, after a 10-year battle, nearly 10-year battle, actually did authorize them to build this road on that same footprint that I mentioned. But we were able to, we being 9 organizations that objected and fought this pretty much the entire way, were able to get enough caveats and restrictions and things that would have to be done in terms of monitoring plans and this, that, and the other, that the landowners finally decided that it was not going to be financially beneficial to them, and they sold to a regional land trust, and that land is now in conservation ownership and will become eventually part of the Nantahala National Forest. So again, without NEPA, there would have been no requirement for the Forest Service to even tell us that they had this request. So honestly, without NEPA, it's entirely possible that they could have been out there building the road before environmental organizations or agencies even had the ability to weigh in on any of these things, like at the outstanding resource waters and the geological formations and so forth. And the current draft forest management plan didn't mention that this was outstanding resource waters, and didn't mention that there's geology that need to be considered. And so some of those things have been incorporated into the new draft forest plan, which is great. And the reason why we've been able to make comments on that plan is largely as a result of NEPA also. All right, I've got one more case study. This one is currently still ongoing, but this has been an even longer battle. So there is a Appalachian Regional Commission highway called Corridor K And it's basically designed, I believe, to connect Chattanooga and Asheville as kind of regional terminuses, but there's a piece in Tennessee and there's a piece in North Carolina. The reason why Highway 74 in Cherokee County is a 4-lane highway through farm fields between Andrews and Murphy is because of this Appalachian Regional Highway money. And initially, back in the 60s, you know, these funds were to open up the mountain region, to bring economic development, to give people better transportation in and out. And it was a great program. And it really, the road between Hayesville and Franklin was Corridor A. It was one of the first ones that was built. I mean, it just cut a day long, it was almost a day long trip, really, to go to Franklin from Hayesville before that road was built. And so, you know, it was a positive program. But today, do we really have that same purpose and need? And so this section of Corridor K, which is, here is Andrews, North Carolina and Cherokee County. This is Robbinsville in Graham County. And then this is Swain County. This is Almond, Bryson City here. So this is the Nantahala Gorge. This is the highway through the Nantahala Gorge. And so there is a need for people in Robbinsville to be able to more quickly get to Bryson City or points beyond to the east for medical care and whatnot. I mean, they are still fairly isolated up here, and there are a lot of slides. The road conditions are not great. And a lot of times, you know, when we're having these heavy rain events and everything, they are fairly isolated, and it is a problem. So there is a need for people from Robbinsville to be able to get, you know, in and out of Greene County more quickly and safely, and particularly when we're having bad weather. And so this piece, this Almond piece of the highway has already been constructed. So this is modern highway here. So the next piece is through the Stokoe community. And then, but see, so this piece is what's being worked on now. So just spoiler alert, we're still working on this, and we're almost to a resolution about that piece. But see, the original purpose and need that that DOT had been giving was to kind of provide a bypass for this Nantahala Gorge. And so the idea was that commerce would go around this way. And the environmental impacts of such a thing are so huge, particularly in this section right here, which I'm going to show you another map, that this is where it's kind of, the NEPA is allowing this project to kind of change direction, okay? And so the focus has transitioned throughout, oh goodness, probably my lifetime, 40 years, I would say, or more. You know, they've been working on this. And one of the reasons why it's been so complicated is because the original purpose and need, in our opinion, was kind of ill-defined, wrongly defined, or whatever. The real purpose and need is to help Robbinsville be able to more easily get in and out to the outside world, if you will, which, you know, not to say Greene County's backwoods, but I love Greene County, and I love the fact that it, you know, is so beautiful and has so many great natural resources, but the people there need to be able to have access, okay? And so this piece of the project is really kind of what had been holding things up for a little while. So most recently, back in, I guess it was 2018 maybe, DOT kind of revived this project, Department of Transportation kind of revived this project, and they put out these 4 alternatives for this, what is called the Topton section. And so this is the piece that I was showing you, was kind of this huge amount of environmental impact. So T1 is this red road, and then T4 is this pink road. So T4, let's see, T1 goes through the Juts Creek Valley, and this is a photo of it. It's an incredibly beautiful valley. Obviously, the people in Juts Creek were very concerned about this potential road coming through their valley, and you can see the steep mountains and everything. I mean, there's a little bit of an open area here, but look at this part. Okay, and so it's not like you could just widen the road through here and call it a day. There were lots of environmental impacts associated with this. And then T4 goes through the Tatham Gap Road. This whole area is part of the Trail of Tears. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. There are other areas that have determined to be eligible. There's also, if I could just jump back real quick, all of these, so this purple line is high quality waters and a drinking water supply watershed for Andrews. There are, this is actually an outstanding resource water, but they went around it, so that was good. Gip Creek is that one. But anyway, this gold part is all the determined historic eligible historic district, and you can see the Trail of Tears there. So this one was just, you know, ripe with all kinds of cultural and environmental impacts. And of course, you can see here the brown that's on Nantahala National Forest. So throughout this process, this thing has been stopped time and again because of NEPA and because of the environmental impacts associated with NEPA. And I mentioned the reasons for that before, which were kind of related to this whole need that NCDOT was saying they had to bypass the whole Nantahala Gorge and go from Andrews to essentially Bryson City Way using this corridors. Anyway, on May 21st, 2019, after more objection from environmental agencies, including MountainTrue and the public, because they had to put these alternatives out, they had to hold public meetings, they had to request public comment. DOT put out a memo in spring of 2019 that says, given the large amount of public opposition to T1 and support for improving existing roadways between Robbinsville and Andrews, it was determined that scenarios T1 and T4 would not be studied further. So they're gone, okay? And so that's NEPA. That's what NEPA does. Just a few more slides. In addition to the National Environmental Policy Act, everybody thought it was so great that most states have enacted a state environmental policy act. And so this is just, so my territory covers a couple counties in Georgia, and I had originally developed this presentation for the Young Harris College environmental policy class. And so there's a couple of Georgia slides in here, but you know, the state environmental policy acts require that anytime you are spending state dollars, you have to go through a NEPA-like process at the state level, okay? So this is for state dollars now instead of federal dollars. And so basically any highway project, this one's just a bridge over Brasstown Creek, but it had to go through a NEPA process, a scoping process, a process of getting public comments, and all of those same things that we've just been talking about. Here is Highway 107 in Jackson County, same thing, state dollars, state highway project, you know, process to go through and determine the environmental, social, and economic impacts related to the highway. And finally, there's another important policy act that I just wanted to touch on, and that is the Freedom of Information Act. You've probably heard about FOIA requests. So this is a huge tool that we use in combination with NEPA to be able to figure out what's going on. So it allows us to request any documents related to a particular project, and there's lots of sidebars surrounding it. So anyway, particularly with the Fires Creek situation, Southern Environmental Law Center was able to get a lot of the correspondence back and forth between the different Forest Service rangers and personnel and these private landowners. And it was very enlightening and helped a lot with, you know, our fight, because we were able to kind of see what was in the minds of the people that were going on associated with it. And again, this is public land. It's public, you know, it's the public's right to know what's happening with it, and the public's right to be able to comment and find out what's going on. When, you know, the federal dollars part of that too was the staff. I mean, federal dollars were spent by the Forest Service staff to be able to make, you know, those types of projects happen. So Again, there are tons of other projects and Forest Service projects, timber harvest projects, road building. Goodness, I-26 in Asheville, the connector there, the road to nowhere that would have built the road out to the graveyards in the national park, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. They're just, like I said, I could have spent the entire 30 minutes talking about different projects. And so, unfortunately, NEPA is currently under attack. There is a kind of proposal that was put out late last year, well, maybe early last year, that would create loopholes in the National Environmental Policy Act to increase the pace and scale of resource extraction. So, for example, the rule that's kind of on the table, the proposed rule that's on the table, would limit the number of acres of a timber harvest that the Forest Service would have to go through NEPA. So most of our timber harvest projects on Nantahala and Pisgah National Forest would fall under the threshold. So we would not have a NEPA process for those timber harvest projects if this rule proposal goes through. It would also limit the scope of public awareness and input on proposed projects. So it pretty much gets it. So the comment deadline was March 10th, 2020, and Southern Environmental Law Center submitted 111 pages of comments on behalf of MountainTrue and nearly 100 other organizations by the deadline. It was an amazing effort, and the update from SELC is that the rule could be finalized by September. At this point, all we could do is reach out to our congressional delegations, representatives and senators in Congress. Congress is pretty much the only one that can stop this particular process right now. And then, of course, you know, we'll have the ability to sue the federal government if they do finalize the rule in its proposed form. But, you know, I'm sure you understand that NEPA is not the only piece of environmental legislation that's under attack under the current administration, and it's a real problem. We've had this act for 50 years and it's been working great, and we've been able to get really good projects on the ground that have the least amount of environmental impact, and we need to fight to defend this particular piece of legislation. All of them, but especially NEPA. So this is final slide, just what can you do to help MountainTrue? You can become a member, read our e-newsletters, keep up with what's going on, talk to your friends and neighbors about what's going on, work on local issues, attend events and outings, volunteer. There's lots of ways to get involved, and we definitely need your support, and there is the website. And here is my contact information if any of you want to contact me later and ask any questions or have any further discussion about these projects or whatever. So I will be happy to take questions.
Great, thank you so much, Callie. We have one question that's come in from Tom that says, what does the term scoping mean?
Okay, that's a good question. So scoping, I think I'll just go back to this so that in case people want to look at it again. So scoping is like the first step in the NEPA process where the agency will put out a request for anybody that has any information about a particular project. So like, I'm just going to use this prescribed burn project in the Lake Notley watershed down in the Chattahoochee National Forest as an example of this. So the Forest Service planned to do a prescribed burning project on basically the Chattahoochee National Forest shoreline of Lake Notley. And so they put out this scoping notice that says, hey, this is what we intend to do. So we intend to burn in patches over this period of time, this piece of land, and it includes maps and all that stuff. Does anybody have any information that they think we ought to know before we start on this project? Okay. And so in the case of Lake Notley, we have actually done, the former Hiawassee River Watershed Coalition, now MountainTrue, had done extensive water quality monitoring of the lake, and computer modeling had been done by the Tennessee Valley Authority to show that those waters are particularly sensitive to phosphorus and nitrates, like nutrients. And when you burn, the runoff could include nutrients, okay? And so that was information that we provided to the Forest Service to say, look, you know, this lake is already sensitive to nutrient inputs, right? And so we're not saying don't burn. Burning is great. And in the right scenario, it's what's needed to make the forest more resilient, right? So we support burning projects. It wasn't about fighting it off. It was just letting them know that Lake Notley is already experiencing issues with the increased algae growth and so forth associated with an increase in nutrient runoff to the reservoir. And so maybe we have, you know, wider streamside zone on the lake shoreline to help catch the runoff, you know, post fire until vegetation gets established. That's just an example of something that they would be looking for during scoping.
Do we have any other questions out there?
Oh, and scoping also identifies the purpose and need. So that's the first place where the purpose and need is identified, is in the scoping project.
All right, we've got one more question, Callie, from
Okay.
Tom. Tom wants to know what kind of documents can you get through the Freedom of Information Act, for example, in the Fires Creek project?
You can get any project-related correspondence, publications, documents, anything that's related to a project. So, I mean, like for the Fires Creek project over the years, it was, you know, boxes and boxes of documents. And so it's everything from email correspondence to letters that were written to presentations at public meetings, anything that was mailed out to project recipients. I mean, just anything that had anything to do with a particular project that involves federal dollars, you can request through the Freedom of Information Act. Now, they, you know, if it's literally boxes of documents that have to be copied and shipped to you, there's going to be a charge associated with that. But it's all public record, and you have the right to request it and review it.
Thanks, Callie. It doesn't look like we have any other questions right now. So thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully we'll see some of you next week to hear from our public lands biologist, Josh Kelly, about ancient forests of the Blue Ridge.
Thank you.